Hi, welcome to Bible 365. I'm Kathy Carter, who I am going through the Bible in 365 days, which is 1 year. I'm sure you could figure that out. And I am using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan, which means I'm reading through the Bible chronologically from start to finish. I'm trying to finish the whole Bible in 1 year. And so far we are 105 days in. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos, I would love if you stayed and listened to it, but then if you enjoy it, I want you to go all the way back to the beginning, start at Genesis, and then meet back here a few months later, because it is the best way to get your foundation, to really understand what it is that you're reading, why it matters, who God is, who we are, where Jesus comes in, and all of those things that make for a solid faith foundation. I'm all about reading your Bible, and that's sort of my goal for this year, is to get as many people reading their Bibles as possible. We are in an area, and I was sort of convicted by this when I went on a missions trip, and I realized how important Bibles were to people. And we really have so many, we have an abundance of them. And I don't think we use them to the best of our advantage. So we might be giving them out a lot at church, right? And I know the pastor is reading it, but is everyone in the congregation reading it? And I'm going to probably say no. And so it's just a passion of mine. And I just think that every time I read it, I get closer to God. I have more faith in God. I step out more in faith. I feel like God is using me in bigger ways. And so I want that for everybody who says that they follow Christ. And so that is the whole gist and purpose of this. So you would go to, if I haven't said it yet, the 1 year chronological Bible reading online, which you can download the Bible reading plan to join along with me. Today we are on day 105. So 105 days in. It is on the calendar 4/14, so April 14th, and we are in the book of Samuel. So we are doing 1 Samuel, we're on 106. We're not on 105. We're on day 106, and it is April 15th on your calendar. So I was off by a day. April 15th, and we are in 1 Samuel 20 through 21, and this is Psalm 34. So Samuel 20 to 21, and Psalm 34. So hopefully I didn't screw that up too badly for you guys. If you are, if you've been with me for a while, I hope you can recognize that I'm in a different outfit than I was yesterday. Maybe that'll help. So anyway, we're in the book of 1 Samuel. Samuel doesn't really show his face too much after this. However, we have met Saul and we have met David. So very briefly, there were 12 tribes of Israel. Those 12 tribes of Israel were enslaved by Egyptians about 2000 BC. I'm going to go with that big number, about 2000 BC. And then Moses came along, and him and his brother Aaron saved this people group up out of slavery with God's power, of course, doing all of these miracles and bringing all of these plagues to save them, and brought them out of the land of Egypt, brought them into the land of Canaan, where then Moses died right on the outside of Canaan, and Joshua and Aaron's son Eleazar wound up taking up the mantle. And then they brought them into the land of Israel, which was the land of Canaan at the time. And they established the 12 tribes all over what is now Israel, and then what is now like Syria, Lebanon, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. And so the 12 tribes established their areas there. They left people in there that they were not supposed to leave in there. So sort of natives of the land, Canaanites, Jebusites, Perizzites, Ammonites, Philistines, all these people were in there. And slowly but surely, some of those people, as the Israelites turned away from God, those people were built up, and then they sort of enslaved or kept down the Israelite people. And then when it got bad enough, they cried out to the Lord. The Lord lifted someone up to lead them and their people in war, kind of bring themselves back up to the forefront, or back up to the top of the kingdom. And then this cycle happened all over again. Then Samuel was born, and Samuel came in, and once he did, it was bad enough with the Philistines that people begged for a king. They were like, everybody around us has a king. We want a king. So God established Saul as a king. Saul was in the tribe of Benjamin, which is the smallest tribe. And he said he was the least of those in that small tribe. Well, no sooner did Saul become king than he essentially turned away from the Lord, and the spirit of the Lord left him, and then the Lord put an evil spirit, came and consistently visited Saul. And I'm going to say in Saul's bitterness and jealousy and fear and all of these things, it allowed God to allow an evil spirit to come into him. He's not always there. When he is there, David was sort of chilling him out, kind of relaxing a little bit. And then David beat Goliath. And now slowly but surely, David has been building up. And David is also the king that has been anointed by Samuel. And so Saul's just freaking out at this point. So yesterday we left it at, grabbing my book. Yesterday we left it where Saul had sent a bunch of people to kill David, even though Saul made a pact, a vow with Jonathan that he wouldn't do this. He still sent a whole bunch of people to kill David, and the Lord changed them all. So as they came in, then they started prophesying instead of killing David. So he miraculously changed their hearts. And then Saul came in and also started prophesying instead of killing David. But David was still scared. But at this point, Jonathan doesn't realize that Saul is losing his marbles and he is trying to take out David. So because they made a vow that he wasn't going to take him out. So here we go. We're going to start here in verse 1. 1 Samuel 20, verse 1. That was a 6-minute background. I feel like they get longer and longer. Sorry. I just want to make sure we all know where we're starting, because we're like in the middle of something. All right, verse 1, it says, David fled from Naioth, which he was with Samuel there, at Ramah, and went to Jonathan. So he went to Jonathan and he's like, what have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me? And Jonathan's like, he's not trying to kill you. Sort of like, we're over that, right? Because Jonathan heard him make a vow that said he wasn't trying to kill him. So Jonathan's like, no, he's not trying to kill you. Well, we know that he is. So then David takes another oath with him. So David essentially is like, I swear that, right? Like, so I swear that your father is trying to kill me. He says, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, there's only a step between me and death. And so Jonathan's like, well, then what can I do? So Jonathan is trying to help David. Why? If you guys remember, they made a covenant not that long ago. Jonathan gave him his robes, and because they love each other, they're like the best of friends. They're closer in some ways, and I would say they are with their wives, right? Like it's certainly not at all sexual, so I don't want to make it that, but they are extremely close. The Lord has brought them together and in a really deep friendship. So again, even making a covenant with each other, which is interesting considering that David is going to become the king. But the truth of the matter is because Jonathan is the son of Saul, he would probably have automatically become the king, right? So we see that there should be a rivalry between them, but there really isn't a rivalry. They're too close to have a rivalry between them. All right. So now he's going to say, so David is coming up with this plan. Tomorrow, he says, the next day is the moon feast. And he said, so I'm not going to be at the table. You're going to say, I went to my family's house. And if Saul's like, sure, no big deal, then we're all good. But if Saul freaks out, then you realize that he is against me. And so this is obviously something that Jonathan doesn't realize. And then he says, but listen, there's a covenant between us. So he reminds him, there's a covenant between us. So if I have done something wrong, just kill me. Don't bring me to your father, right? Just kill me if there's something between us. And Jonathan says, no, there's not. So if you go to verse 9, he says, never. If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you? So he said, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? And so he says, let's go in the field together. So then Jonathan's kind of going to give some depth to this plan. So he says, he's swearing. So again, we've got some vows going. I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I'll surely sound out my father by this time, the day after tomorrow. So remember, they have this feast coming up. It's a few days. And he's saying, so your seat's going to be empty. And he says, so here's the deal. You're going to hide. I'm going to tell my dad that you're not here. And we're going to see how he responds. If he responds badly, then here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shoot arrows into the forest. And if I shoot arrows and they land right next to you, we're all good. You can come back. But if I shoot arrows and they go out farther than you, then you know that the Lord says you got to run. So here we go again with he's setting up this plan, but he's leaning on the Lord for the answers. So it's like the roll of the dice thing, like the Urim and Thummim. So it's like the roll of the dice. He's giving a choice, and he's allowing the Lord to make the proper choice. So he's leaving it to him. All right. So then he says, in verse 18, I just thought this was interesting because he says, Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon feast. You will be missed because your seat is empty. And I thought it meant like, oh, you'll be missed. But I think it's just, there's going to be a recognition that you're not there. So someone's going to have to say something. However, right away, that doesn't happen. So the seat is empty on day one. And then Saul says nothing because he thinks to himself, something must have happened to David. He must be ceremonially unclean. And remember, if you're ceremonially unclean, you need to go clean before you come back. So they had rituals that they had to do. If you guys have been with me through Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, you recognize that there are ceremonially unclean things. And when they have to stay away from everybody else before they can come back into the camp and be with everyone. And so he's making that assumption. But then the next day comes up and David's still not there. So it says, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, because he said, why hasn't he come to the king's table? And Jonathan says, I let him go. He said he wanted to go visit his family, and so I let him go. And then in verse 30, he says, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, which doesn't really sound bad when I say it like this out loud, because it kind of seems ridiculous and old school. But I actually think at that time, it was really very harsh. I'm going to say it's probably closer to cursing that we would know now, that he's kind of cursing him out, and he can believe, like, why would you do that? You sided with him over me. Don't you realize that he's going to be king over top of you if you let him live? I have to kill him. And so he's trying to even get Jonathan in on this plan of killing David. And then in verse 32, Jonathan's like, why should he be put to death? So just looking at this nature of Jonathan, so we see a lot of great things in David, but I feel like we leave out some of the great things that we see in Jonathan, the love that he has for David. And again, even talking just a few minutes ago about them being rivalrous, the love that he has for him anyway. Despite the fact that David is a better warrior than he is, he's been married to Saul's daughter, right? He killed 200 Philistines. Like, he's got songs about him. Jonathan doesn't have songs about him, and yet we don't see any jealousy in Jonathan at all. All we see is this gentle, loving nature in him, and the desire to do good according to the Lord. So he's like, why should he be put to death? What has he done? So then Saul hurls a spear at his own son. So he's so mad, and he's so embittered, and he's so desperate for David to die that he throws a spear at his own son because he's just so angry. And he said, then Jonathan obviously realizes at this point that his father is going to kill David. So the plan sort of goes through. Jonathan goes, he shoots the arrows, the boy comes out, and he says, go further, aren't they further? And then he goes and he sees David. So he sends the boy out really far so he can kind of have this little meeting with David to say goodbye. So it says, Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy, and he said, carry him back to town. After the boy is gone, David gets up, and they kiss each other, and they wept together. But obviously David wept the most because David's got to leave now. He's got to go hide. And then Jonathan said, go in peace. So he's reminding him of the covenant they had. Go in peace. We have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying the Lord is a witness between you and me and our descendants forever. So no matter what happens, these two have promised to be good to each other through the Lord, even through all of their descendants. So let's say something happens to David, then Jonathan will deal with lovingly and kindly with David's descendants, and then the opposite would happen, right? So if something happens to Jonathan, then David will protect their descendants from here on out. So they'll be with each other and protecting each other as family. So then moving on to the next chapter, it says, from here, David went to Nob. So it doesn't seem like it's too far from where they are, but he did run, and he went to a different location. And here he sees a priest, and his name is Ahimelech, and he's all by himself. Ahimelech's kind of worried, and he's like, what's happening? What's going on? David lies and says, the king sent me on a mission. My men are coming. And he's like, but I have no food. And so the only food that was there was consecrated bread. This was not food that they should have, that David, I keep saying they as if there were people there. It really just was David. This was not food that David should have been eating. But the priest does give it to David because he's in need and there's food here. So, and he's one of the Lord's people. He's one of the king's people. And so he does give him food. And then he asks for a weapon. And there are no weapons there, obviously, except Goliath's sword. And so I'm assuming this is a huge sword. But David takes this sword as well because it's this sword, you know, interestingly enough, it's the sword that David won in the fight with Goliath. If you remember, David brought all the weapons into the tent. And so that sword was given to him. So while they were there, and we're not going to see him for the rest of this day, but we'll see him again. While they were there, this guy named Doug was there. So it's Doug the Edomite, which means he's not an Israelite, but he's an Edomite. He's a shepherd, and he's one of Saul's servants. So like literally, he's one of the people that serve Saul as his shepherd, tending to his flocks. And so he happened to be there when all of these things were happening. We might see him later. All right. So then, so like I said, he takes the weapon. And then that day he runs. So go into verse 10. He runs to Achish, the king of Gath. This is, again, obviously it's a king. So it's not the king of Israel. It is the king of a different people group. And so he's there, and David is an Israelite, and he is a well-known Israelite. And so these women are like, hey, isn't this David? Sorry, I say women, it just says the servants. Servants of this king are like, this is David. This is the one who has killed a lot of people, if you remember. Like, Saul's killed thousands, but he's killed tens of thousands. So, like, he's a pretty big deal. And so David got really scared that they knew and recognized. And so he started acting like a madman. We don't get a lot out of what's going on, but it seems like he was trying to protect himself. He's in a land in which he probably went to war with some of these people and killed some of these people. So he can't be himself in order to be protected. Otherwise, he will probably be killed. He would probably be at least imprisoned, if not killed. And so he acted a little bit crazy. And then he says, and then of course the king is like, I don't need that in my... He says, does this guy have to come into my house? And so he's not going to kill him, we see, which is good. So maybe he's going to live in that area. We'll find out. But before he does, or wherever he's living at this point, he writes this psalm. So if you, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we read another one of the psalms. And these are, psalms are songs, poetry. So these are things that are written for the Lord. These are not necessarily stories, although sometimes they're reminders of things. And so in here, I just want to remind you again that David is running. He's afraid. There's a possibility that he's going to be killed. He's alone. He has left his wife. I'm certain at this point he probably has kids, right? Because he has at least one wife. And so he probably has kids. He's been to war a few times, so he's a grown man. So there's a chance that he has family, and he's not with them. He's not with friends. He had to leave Jonathan, his best friend. He had to leave all of his warriors, right? So he is just, he's got no food, right? He only had that bread. So he is just in a desperate place. So even if he's sitting pretty in a house, right? Which I'm not too sure. It doesn't seem like this king kind of wants to keep him in the house. But let's just say he's sitting pretty in a house. He's alone. He's in a land that is not his. And he's scared he's going to die. Bringing all this up because he writes another poem to the Lord. Because that's who he has, right? He's not writing his letters to Jonathan. He's not writing his letters to his wife, Michal. He's not writing any of these. So he's writing to the Lord. He's writing in his desperation. He calls out to God. It's a great reminder. I say this so often because this, like, I feel like the whole book is reminding, right? Like, remember this people, remember that people, don't forget me, don't forget this. And because we always do. But when David is alone and he's got nothing left, the first thing he does is reach out to the Lord because he knows the Lord and he loves the Lord and he trusts the Lord, right? So he writes a loving letter to his God, the person who has blessed him in all things, the person who has helped him through all things, the person who he knows will continue to help him through all things. So this is who he writes his letter to. So I just want to give you just a brief. It says, I'm going to extol the Lord at all times. And it means praise huge, I'm just going to give this major praise to the Lord. He is alone. He has no family. He's pretending he's crazy. He's on death's door, right? There's just any time people can come. And the first thing he does is say, I will praise you, Lord. He doesn't say, listen, what can you do for me today? I'm really hungry. He praises the Lord. It is the very first thing that he writes with his pen, whatever he writes with. I don't know, feather, I don't know, whatever he's writing with. But he says he's going to praise the Lord at all times. Praise will always be on his lips. He's going to glory the Lord. He says, let the afflicted, which is him, hear and rejoice. He's reminding himself, and he's reminding anyone that may ever possibly see this in the future. But he's reminding himself, because he is the afflicted. Rejoice, glorify the Lord with him, and exalt the Lord's name together. And then he says, I sought the Lord. He's delivering him from his fears. He looks to him, the Lord is radiant. Faces aren't covered with shame. The angels encamp around him, so he always feels protected, even when he's not very literally protected. And so in verse 8, it says, taste and see that the Lord is good. So he's reminding us to not forget that the Lord is good. And then I just want to read verses 12 through 14. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. So even while he's in the land that is not his own, he is reminding himself, right, through these words, he's reminding himself to do all these things. Don't turn to evil, even in the scariest of times. Don't seek evil, still do what is good. Don't lie, cheat, don't do the bad things, Lord. Seek peace and pursue it. So even seeking peace, even while someone is not seeking peace against him. So it says, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and his ears are attentive. The Lord is listening. The righteous cry out. He delivers the righteous people, those who love him, right? So the righteous being those who love him and follow his commands. And then it says in verse 22, it says, the Lord will rescue his servants. No one who takes refuge in the Lord will be condemned. And this is both literal and figurative, right? So being condemned would be like an eternal death, right? So they would have believed it would be death forever. So if you don't, what does it say? If you don't take refuge in him, you could be condemned forever. So take refuge in the Lord, so you will have him for eternity. And that is what he believed. I think that's still true for us. And I just wanted to share, and I'm going to try and post a link in the comments, or maybe I'll put it in the video somehow. There's a song by Shane and Shane called Psalm 34. And it is a really good song if you like contemporary Christian music. And so I'm going to add that too as well. So that's the end of today. And I feel like although it's in a bad area, we still left on a really good note, because this is all about loving the Lord and remembering the Lord and knowing that if you were in any afflictions at this point, right? Like if anything bad is happening in your life, which on a day-to-day basis, that could be so many things. The Lord is good. The Lord delivers you, and he is your refuge, right? He is here for you. He is here for me, for those of us that abide in him. And I actually just realized that I have my shirt on, abide in him. If you abide in him, he is your refuge. So if you liked this, or if it was a blessing to you, like it, hit the like button at the end of this. I want you to share it with people. Please just keep reading your Bible and read it with other people. Bless people. This is how we bless people. We don't necessarily bless them by giving them something. Bless them by sharing the word of the Lord with them. And then I want you to subscribe to the channel, so this will continue to pop up for you. Otherwise, you'll never find it. So I will see you tomorrow. And in the meantime, keep reading.